Good afternoon, and welcome to today's debate, how indoor lighting is affecting your health. We're very happy that you will join us today. This is the first event in a series focusing on healthy buildings, high performance, and happy hearts and minds. It is a partnership between BLOXHUB, Aalborg University, Lys PropTech, Danish Sound Cluster, the VELUX Group, and Realdania. And I'm happy to pass on the word to program responsible Gade Iversen from Realdania to intro the series. Hello, Anne.
Hello. Thanks, Lone. Thanks for the nice introduction. And thanks for giving me the chance to introduce this great initiative of debate series on indoor climate that you just have launched with this webinar today. As already mentioned, my name is Gade Iversen, and I'm a project leader at Realdania working with sustainable buildings and indoor climate. Our mission at Realdania is to improve life quality in the built environment. And through our focus on a good indoor climate, we have a special focus on supporting the development of a built environment that is healthy and thereby enhance life quality. As a part of our focus on a good indoor climate, we support several projects that investigate the relation between people's health and the building's indoor climate. And this is because we spend 90% of our time indoors. And because the fundament for a healthy adult life is created when you are a child, we have a special focus on the children's indoor climate. And since 2016, we have supported projects that investigated and improved the indoor climate in buildings where the children are during an entire day. This means the indoor climate at home and in the institution, the school and daycare. For the last 3 years and for the next 3 years to come, we have a special focus on the indoor climate in schools with a campaign about the school's indoor climate. And back in 2017, the Technical University of Denmark and the Alexander Institute made baseline studies for us, where they investigated the indoor climate in the Danish schools. And the findings from these studies show that in more than 50% of the classes, there are problems with the indoor environment. In order to improve health and well-being among children and teachers and to raise awareness of the problems with the indoor climate, we have during 2019 given 12 municipalities in Denmark funding to develop strategic indoor climate plans for the schools. And in the beginning of the next year, we'll publish a handbook with the findings from the municipalities' work with the strategic plans. And what we can see from these plans, and also the reason why I'm telling you this, is that all the plans are different from each other, but they have one thing in common, and that is that they are all work with the indoor climate from a holistic approach, looking at the indoor climate topics, light, sound, air, temperature, and the space and learning environment they are engaging with. And all this is because the indoor climate is a fundamental aspect for a healthy building. And when you think of healthy buildings, the thing that first springs to mind for most people is the physical part of health. For instance, being too cold in the winter or too hot to sleep on warm nights, or the irritation of neighbor noise transmitted through walls. Or in these COVID-19 times, we think of if there's proper ventilation or if it's possible to be together apart. However, the relationship between health and the building is more than this. Not only should a building provide an indoor environment which enables physical well-being, it should also promote mental well-being, giving you as an occupant a happy heart and happy mind, as nicely put in the overall title for this event series. The indoor climate is one aspect of a healthy building. The fundament, some would say, I tend to agree. And to give you an example of this fundament, I'll tell you an experience we had when interviewing the teachers from one of the schools that has retrofitted, and that was retrofitted through the work done in our campaign about schools' indoor climate. Before retrofitting, the teachers always started class during winter rearranging the tables so they were not located nearby the windows, because here the pupils experienced draft and being too cold. When asked the question about what was the best about the retrofitted school, then the teacher promptly answers that it is that now they can focus on their primary job, which is teaching and encourage social engagement. Now they don't have to think about if the classroom is suited for teaching purpose. The physical fundament is okay. And the physical fundament is typically being described by 5 indoor climate topics: light, sound, air, temperature, and the relation to the space. All 5 topics influence each other and therefore needs to be seen from a holistic approach. And in general, research shows that a good performance of each topic results in a higher performance for the occupants in the building and a higher well-being both mentally and physically. So the aim of this event series that Lone just as introduced you to is and is launched today will broaden our mind on the indoor climate topic. And with these words, I'll give the word back to you, Lone, and kickstart the event series about healthy buildings, happy performance, happy hearts and minds.
Thank you very much, Anne, and also for taking part and for all the great work that you are doing, working on this important agenda. It takes a holistic approach. It is a very broad topic. It takes a holistic approach, but still you can section it into different disciplines. And that is how we have structured the first 4 debates, and then we will sum it up towards the end, like Anne described. And today we start on a dark day in December. We start with looking into the topic of light. And we look into office lighting, of which we are unusually dependent in times like this, where it's very cold outside. And we had a science talk last week, which was very interesting, talking about amongst others, the non-visual effects of lighting. And we will have a mini pep talk from Marilyne Andersen on the topic of light. And I would like to welcome Marilyne. I'd just like to introduce you shortly, which is difficult because you have an impressive CV. But Marilyne is a full professor of sustainable construction technologies, leading the Laboratory of Integrated Performance in Design, LIPID. And you were an assistant associate professor in the building technology of the MIT School of Architecture and Planning and founded the MIT Daylighting Lab in 2004. Your research focuses on interfaces between science, engineering, architectural design, and your emphasis is on the impact of daylight on building occupants, on which you have authored more than 200 papers. So we are in truly safe hands for you to give us a pep talk and maybe pose some questions. We're eager to hear your perspectives on it. Welcome, Marilyne, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Lone, for this wonderful introduction. It's a pleasure to be amongst you and to be amongst the community who all care about the quality of indoor environment and how it can be healthier and better for us, I would say. So maybe we can start with the slides, as I don't want to go over the 7 minutes. I don't know if they are okay. Yeah. So the point I would like to make to kind of set up the stage is that, as you probably all know, in this audience, the importance of the day-night cycle and how much we respond to it psychologically and physiologically. So the reason you might be feeling a little down when we get to the winter solstice is normal. It's because we get less and less of that stimulation that we get from light and from daylight in particular. Especially today when we spend all that time indoors, 90% of our time is typically spent indoors. Not only do we do that, and therefore we are kind of light deprived, but we also live a kind of an urban lifestyle that goes against this light-dark cycle. And therefore we start to disrupt our circadian rhythms and our natural ability to respond to the stimulus that light gives us and tells us, now is the day, you have to be alert, you have to be productive, and now is the night, you should sleep and not be on your screen. And so different discoveries, amongst which one of the very important one was that we have a photoreceptor in the back of our eye that we didn't know about 20 years ago, and is responsible for helping us know when it's day and when it's night, and therefore also has all these impacts on the immune system, our alertness, our ability to sleep well, our melatonin production at night, etc. And so if we move to the next slide, what we sort of intuitively know or realize, especially if we experience it on a daily basis, is that there is something about being in bright days and dark nights that is good for us. And of course, it is good for us because we evolved under these conditions. However, if we go to the next, we have also the ability to change this and either in the extremes, let's say, have jet lag, experience jet lag, or experience shift work, in which case our clock doesn't correspond at all to the natural one. And every time, So if we now look into an interior experience, and we can take a very interesting and beautiful building, actually, the Iversen Student Learning Center as an example, how we live in it from the indoors can look like this floor that they call the forest, that's Noheta called the forest. So it's maybe not as connected to daylight as we can imagine. And then if we look at another floor, then it's a whole different experience in the same building. And when we really look at how the occupant experiences that, it's about what he or she sees from inside. And this should be accounted for when we start to look at what is the potential of a space to keep us healthy or to keep us alert. And so if we look at how this can be sort of understood, well, it's complicated. So what really happens in our bodies is that whenever we are exposed to light, there are a whole number of processes that we try to translate into mathematical terms, but it's a whole mechanisms, iterative mechanisms happening in the brain through a different pathway than vision, actually, that ultimately leads to a body response. And these mechanisms depend on many things, on how much light we are exposed to, what is their color, how much time there is that we are exposed to, and what were we exposed to before. And the very important aspect of it is that it is cumulative over time. It's everything counts, not just the moment you're in. And so then if we look at what this can mean and how we can sort of inform about these processes when we think about interior spaces, well, we want to avoid feeling down and sort of being too light deprived indoors, and we want to favor situations where we could have the right or the enough amount of light during the day. And so then we can start to think of, okay, so if I know this for a given place, what about my behavior in a building? And this is where we can start to see, okay, if someone uses a building in a certain way, maybe they will reach a certain healthiness dose, let's say. But if someone else uses the same building in a different way, maybe they don't. So there is this whole sort of interrelationship between behavior, the potential from the building, and what you do either within or outside of the building that will matter. And of course, if we try to monitor this, we could use wearable technology like loose technologies is proposing, so to try to track what people really are exposed to on a daily basis, and then take decisions, whether it's on design or on behavior. From a research standpoint, there are so many open questions still up there. Is there something inherently beneficial about daylight versus electric light, or is it just because it's more abundant, free, and has enough blue? What light really matters when? These are actually unsolved questions. We don't quite know what it is that we need and when, so we don't quite know yet exactly what to tell people they should know. All we know is that we evolved for hundreds of thousands of years under daylight, and that this is definitely a light that is good for us, and that it's bright during the day and dark during the night. So the fact that it depends so much on intensity, wavelength, light pattern, timing, etc., means that we can also go further into monitoring this. And so one of the projects we are working on is to try to look at what we experience of the world in a kind of hyperspectral way. So when we see something, of course, we see it visually, and the light that we get in our eye is spectrally dependent and timely dependent, and then has this three-dimensional origin. And so what we are currently working on is to try to get that resolution also embedded in monitoring technology, like wearable technology, that allows us then to better understand what matters when, and also whether spectra offered by daylight could be maybe different or not to spectra offered by electric light. So overall, the idea is to try to make sure we take the occupant's perspective when we think about an interior space. And a question I might be interested to ask to the panelists is how academia can really work better hand in hand with industry or with practice, for that matter, to get this occupant's perspective always further embedded in the primary concerns of indoor spaces. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marilyne. Huge applause from here, and I can hear it online too. And thank you for posing us the question that we will be addressing in the panel from the 4 different panelists and perspectives. And I know you're not able to stay on because you are in a busy schedule today. One brief question maybe, because we are in BLOXHUB, where startups is an important part of well, talent growth, but also how to stimulate the built environment. And we have PropTech on board, which has a PropTech lab. Property tech is something which is going to be more and more significant. And you have in fact started a startup working with this, so you have bridged towards practice. Could you briefly maybe outline, I think it's called Occupants. Could you briefly say, we saw something from it, so what is it, what are the knots that this is tying to address the problem?
Yeah, so indeed, this is true that it was one way we found to reach out to practice and to try to have an influence on architectural design and how we think about buildings in general. So this startup, indeed called Occupant Dynamics, was founded on the basis of the research we have developed in the last 10 to 15 years that actually started at MIT and now we continue at EPFL on finding ways to engage in a dialogue with designers about occupant-centric aspects of architectural spaces, meaning what is it that we like in a space related to daylight that make us want to do certain activities in some spaces over others? So about contrast, about visual interest, about where we want to do what. So this is more in the psychological. On the other hand, we also incorporated the models that I briefly showed in my short introduction to about health and vitality, to try to bring the knowledge about light input and what it means in terms of what we know so far anyway in the health potential or vitality potential. And so to have packaged that into a tool, and you saw some images, but not so many, that can speak to architects with colors and scales that are actually intuitive, we can engage in a different kind of dialogue than, do I have 300 lux? It's a dialogue about what the space is exciting for, what it is, why it is good for you. And it's a level of dialogue that is really exciting to have with architects, designers, or owners, because it speaks about why we design daylit spaces in the first place, is to enjoy it.
Thank you very much. That's very inspiring and quite incredible with a researcher of your capacity also engaging into a startup. That is for sure a role model for many researchers. Thank you very much for participating, Marilyne, and wishing you a very good rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And so that will, first of all, get our event series started. We're introduced by Anne, and with Marilyne introducing and giving us a pep talk and saying what is actually already there for knowledge, all that we know. And there are actually also technologies and apps and designer tools to make it happen. But is it actually happening, or could we do more in terms of indoor lighting and lighting as such? And the fundamental starting point is the question if the lighting affects your health. And it definitely does. I would like to just give you a brief account on why I am really, really happy that light has a positive effect on health. This is a letter written by my father in 1937, when he was 19 years old. He caught tuberculosis, and that was before penicillin was introduced or cured. So the cure was to get into the fresh air and get exposed to as much healthy light as possible. And I'm from Jutland, I'm from Aarhus, so he writes in Holte. He was evidently sent here towards the sanatorium at the time at the north of Copenhagen. And he was exposing himself to as much light as possible to recover. And this, he sits down to write. In the end of the letter, he's asking for money, if they could send money. So I think that's the real reason for writing the letter. But he starts off saying, it's raining, so I can sit down and write letter. If it was not raining, he had to be outside. And he recovered, and he went on to get 5 children, and I'm number 5. So I'm really happy about the healthy effects of light. And yes, we know it, but still, we are not there yet in terms of building design, or are we actually? How close are we? And that's what we're trying to cover today in the indoor lighting and how it's affecting your health, because outdoor lighting, yes, it is evidently beneficial for us, and we know that, but we are subject to staying in buildings for a lot of the time. So how are these buildings then catering for the needs that we have? And I hope you will actually along the way write up your questions. We would like to include you into the debate as well. So if you think of something that we didn't cover or would like us to cover, then please write in and we will cover the questions also along the way and not necessarily in the end. I'd like to introduce our strong panel for the day. We have 4 panelists, and it is Christina Blach Petersen, who is CEO and co-founder of VELUX Technologies. Kathrine Hansen, head of lighting and assistant professor at Aalborg University, Copenhagen. Fangel Poulsen, Bauherr, client representative professionally, but also actually you are the expert on the building that we are in. Yes, so we will probably also be covering that in some respects. And Merete Madsen, who is former professor and now a lighting designer, architect at Mo. Welcome to you all, and thanks for coming. And we will do the debate in a conversation with me, with you, between you, and especially with you. So please give us your questions. It is December, it is afternoon. Don't know if you've had your daily light dose today, but for sure the blue screen here will talk a lot about light. And Christina, I had the opportunity to actually test your, what also mentioned by Marilyne, namely the Lys button. So I have been testing it. Yes. I have signed up for your app. I have detected my chronotype. I am a midday dove. Okay. Mm-hmm. And apparently, if I solve problems, it better be at 10 to 3 in the afternoon. And then to do fitness, that should be around 10 to 4. Okay. So I'll have to go and do that after this. So I got a lot more to know about my chronotype. And maybe you could explain what is it that you determine a chronotype. But also right now, I can see my Lys button is saying that I should feel energized with the light I'm in. I tested it walking up the stairs here in BLOXHUB from the canteen, and that was making me more and more sleepy as I, according to the app, I managed to get it to the top of the stairs, but apparently the lighting was not optimal for that. Yeah. So please, can you briefly introduce us to what is it that you do around lighting?
Of course, thank you so much for having me. My name is Christina Blach Petersen. I'm the co-founder of VELUX Technologies, and our core mission is to help people live healthier with light. We identified 3 key steps in our mission, where the first is to create awareness around light's impact on health and well-being. And we created this wearable light sensing device that connects to a mobile app that allows people, like Lone now did, to understand in real time how is the environment impacting their health, how is the light in their environment impacting them. Because we don't have a natural mechanism to give us feedback on the light we receive, because the eye is indeed also an organ of vision. So we needed to sort of use technology to get to that. The second part of our mission is to help facilitate behavior change. We want not only to improve indoor lighting, but we also want people to spend more time in natural daylight. On average, on our user base, we see that people spend around 30 minutes of 30 minutes of time outside in natural light per day, which is nothing. And then from using our technology, we can nudge people to, on average, get around 56 minutes of natural daylight. So that's part of it as well. And then the final thing is that we integrate directly with artificial lighting to improve the lighting in indoor spaces. And like just to tell you a bit about why I started this. So initially 4 years ago, studying at Imperial College and working with Intel, they asked me to solve a problem in future urban environments. And I was sitting in our studio with fluorescent light tubes, and I could feel how it impacted me. I got a headache straight away. It was night outside, but I was in this blue light. I didn't know much about circadian rhythms, but then I delved into it. I got to know about Marilyne, Andersen, and all these other amazing professors in this field. And then I really realized that there was so much knowledge about light's impact on health and well-being within the four walls of academia, but there was a need to translate some of that knowledge into value for people on the street, for occupants of buildings, and that's why we started the company.
Impressive. So you bring about a lot of the technology and the knowledge and ability to nudge people if you can move them from 30 to 56 minutes.
Yeah.
So is there any problems that you can see in bringing this technology out, but also in terms of design? What is the problem or the situation today?
I think it's interesting how we're inherently really concerned about our personal health. We're continuously thinking about what we eat, exercise. We're also thinking about air quality, but light seems to still be, one thing that we don't really care about or we neglect in a way. And maybe it's because it's so essential to life on the planet that we, in a way, we don't even. It's so intangible, but air is also intangible. So why is it that light is not on people's agenda? I think there's a need for collaboration. As a small startup, we can't create this awareness, and I think maybe the problem is twofold. There is, or maybe an opportunity for the future, like working either top down or bottom up, whether it's being like regulations that we need to work on, or it's bottom up, like having people really demanding healthier light indoors. But yeah, I want to sort of hear what you guys say as well.
Great. Thank you very much. I would like to take that onwards to you, Peter. Maybe you'd give a short introduction to yourself, starting with that, and if you have a personal history with light, that would be interesting to hear. You work professionally with the design of buildings and getting the job done, but also programming it. So what is, in your experience, is there this challenge that Christina is outlining, that there is a lack of knowledge or attention or focus?
Yes.
Good.
Yes. But no, just to begin in one place. No, my name is Peter Fangel. I'm director at Bauherr. I'm also Christina's neighbor down here in BLOXHUB. So we meet frequently around the house, and we are client representatives, or we act as clients on behalf of other clients. So we're developers, you can say. So we build buildings. I'm not a light expert. I'm not a daylight expert, or I don't know particularly much more than I could say an average engineer or architect would do. But of course we are all affected by light. So Lone, yes. Do we have any experience with daylight? I guess everybody does, don't they? I can tell you. Now I'm 53 years old, and gradually getting older, I get more and more affected by this winter that we have in this where we're living. So I actually have this idea that I want to buy another place to live. I mean, that's rather radical, isn't it? I mean, I actually want to get away from it, and perhaps it's also because of Corona and all these things. So I went to Rome here in the fall to look at real estate, just to see if I could find a place, because the idea was if I go to Rome in February or January, there must be more light. And that's primarily drive. They also have good food, and they also have and perhaps a better climate and stuff like that. But I mean, light is definitely a driving factor. So yes, of course we have experience with this. And I also, when we discuss architecture, you can say the primary premise for having architecture is light. I mean, you can't create architecture without light, because then there's nothing to see. Then you can, of course, have objects and you can have houses, but you cannot have architecture. So if you want to have architecture, you need to have light one way or another. It could be daylight, could be artificial, of course, but you need to have something to look at, to experience, and otherwise you really do not have architecture. So it's a super, super important instrument in designing in our environment and surrounding us. So that being said, yes, we have experience. Yes, it is important. Do we lack knowledge? Yes, I think we do, and it's not only because I hear what you clever people tell me about light, but I can tell you that the building regs in this country is not really developed for a long time in how we actually treat light. And well, I'm not an expert here, but I'm saying I'm just a little bit puzzled that it's the same calculation, the same way of percepting the light challenge that we always face. And I'm pretty sure that it is valuable. Perhaps one of the problems is that it is not really easy to account for. I mean, what is the real effect here? I'm pretty sure that you would know, but it's not that tangible. And that is one of the problems that we are facing. When you were, or we still are, developing all kinds of tools in the built environment to lower energy usage in general, that is very accountable. I mean, you will save money, or you will also have there's a big discussion on global warming and all these things, but so that naturally just drives the discussion in a very tangible and understandable way. But we do not have that picture with light, so we really do not understand what the real value is. And I truly trust you that there is a lot of advantages, but for me as a developer, and perhaps for many, many users and architects or engineers, we really do not quite understand what the value is.
Okay.
So yes, there is a lack of knowledge. Was that an answer to
yes,
that?
Yes, it definitely
okay,
was. It gives us a lot of, looking ahead, but also looking back, because you went to Rome, and all paths lead to Rome. You have to go there also to find one of the most beautiful examples and buildings of light, the Pantheon.
Right.
Which I think I read recently. Margrethe Vestager accounted it that was her dream place, to be able to be actually alone in the Pantheon and try and contemplate in that space that is the most sacred place. But going to Rome, Ellen, I know you nearly come straight from Rome and have been studying light in Rome, and you have actually, as I think, started the first professional lighting designer education up in Denmark around this. So how can you do that if we don't know how to account for it? And what is it that you teach? And is there actually a problem, or do we just need more of your students and candidates to come out and get into action?
Yeah, thank you for bringing this up. I think this is a fantastic example of how important light is and lighting is, and why it's really important to understand this in a design approach, because that's the designer that can draw together all the different fields, all the different knowledge areas in a holistic design. We are at a stage now where a lot of things are happening within the field of lighting. And I'm so happy that you brought up the narrative or story about Rome, because yes, I went to Rome, I was going to study light, and I actually found out, no, I'm going to study the sky, because this is what touched us, that's the sky. And I actually found out in Rome there are 3 types of skies. There's a sky that's cut into strips. When you walk in the narrow streets, we love it. We love the dynamics of these strips in the streets. Then there are the courtyards, where we have the square of the sky. We also love it. And then we go to the areas around Rome to see the sunset. So that's the 3 spatial characteristics of the sky, and we can actually turn this into spatial characteristics of architecture. And this is what I would like to bring today is, it's now the time is ready that we can combine the complexity of the dynamics of daylight that we discover when we look into the sky, and we can all feel how wonderful this is, and the dynamics of dynamic lighting, because we also know how to do all kind of lighting. We just don't know how to combine these 2 possibilities in a way where they complement each other. When we design architecture, we have a daylight inflow. And all architects know the potentials in this. It's not necessarily the sunlight, but it's the flow of light coming in from a side window or a rooftop window, Lone, creating this space and these zones and hierarchies in the space. And we need to understand that the dynamics of the lighting needs to meet this and need to balance this and need to complement this. And in days like this where it's gray, we don't have any characteristics in the light, we need to balance it with more direct warm light. And we know if we make these combinations of light, as Marilyne Andersen said, in a three-dimensional understanding and an understanding of time, not only the circadian rhythm, but also an understanding of how people perceive light, perceive the space, perceive the world out there. So of course it's also reacting in how the sky is right here and now, because we want the dynamic lighting of the future to put man in touch with his environment.
That is really beautiful. Thank you very much for this first account and taking it indoors, Merete. Not that you don't do outdoors. I have seen that you've recently done a lighting installation in the outdoors, creating actually a city, an urban environment space with light. But I think what you mainly do, and also in your consulting with clients and planning and design, you do exactly that, combining the both types of lighting. What is it in your experience that is the problem? Which requests do you hear from clients? Do they come to you and say, give me the best lighting situation that you can? How can I get the most expensive, best lighting design from you?
Well, I think mostly we hear like, how can we make it as cheap as possible, more or less legal, kind of. But it's interesting. I mean, I'm an architect and a lighting designer. It's interesting that we made like a huge, you can say it's like 80 meters in, whatever it's called, 25 meters in diameter, a circle changing light with electrical light. But the colors are chosen from the twilight. So if we stood there and just watched the twilight from sunset, we have it on 100%. And then the first period of twilight is called civil twilight, and a lot of everything happens with the sky. And just to illustrate, like you have civil twilight, and then you have nautical twilight, and then you have astronomical twilight, and we dim from 100% to 1%. But everything happened through this first period, we dim to 25%. So it's also where you have the blue hours. It's like the first 6 degrees where the sun goes under the horizon. So even though I think I spent 95% of my time doing electrical light outdoor and indoor, everything is rooted with daylight. And that has to do, I think, with the architectural training or just the love of, twilight. I really, really seriously love twilight. It's so rich and everything happened there. And now we have December, we have to get over with it, but it'll be summer. And in summer, we only have like the 2 twilight period. We have these bright summer nights that we all talk about and all the music. There's like 1,000 music numbers that's about the Danish or the Scandinavian bright summer nights. And that's because we only go to nautical twilight, so you can actually more or less read during the night. And you said that, like the combination of daylight and electrical light. I try to with Lone Feifer work with a twilight scenario where we dim the general lighting in the twilight period in order to experience twilight. Because if you just keep like 300 lux or even internationally 500 lux on at all time, you have, like we have now, completely dark outside, a lot of light inside, and the only thing you experience is yourself mirroring in the window. So to have daylight into the building is about to get daylight because it's healthy, it's free. It's square meter or daylight. That's the game. But to introduce daylight into the spaces is both like we can do so much more with lighting control and understand, for instance, the twilight period where we should dim and have complete different. And of course, it's a huge struggle because you will have someone saying, but that's illegal because it's not up to standards. And so you need brave clients who say, we want that. And when the client said, we want it and we trust her, she knows what she's doing, And of course, with electrical lighting, you can always reprogram.
Okay.
And I agree. Now I was like, tuk. And Christina, well, you just said, should we go by regulations? I can talk forever about regulations. I think I'm one of the Danish expert in little black holes for regulations, because I think they're so stupid. And so one thing is change regulation. I think a lot of people work really hard on that. The other thing is the awareness of people. I can see that in kindergartens. I get so many projects because some energy person been there optimizing daylight, and you have the person working there, and they're like, I'm not going to set foot in there until you turn off the light and give me like 10,000 kroner to IKEA. And I would like to be there before the disaster was made. So I can see that, and in schools it's the same. And in hospitals and in elderly homes, there's a lot of places where professional people have an awareness of the importance of light, and they put demands, and that matters. So I think it's both ways.
That's exactly to the point on a question from Turid Øyen, who would like to know your thoughts, and I'll start with you, Merete, addressing that. Any thoughts on how architects and lighting designers can embrace the changing need for light as people get older? What Peter mentioned, we all get older. This is most often existing buildings and home environments.
Yes.
So how do you cater for that? Because a lot of people sitting in elderly homes may have difficulties in getting exposure to the natural light diet.
Yeah.
They will be subject to the quality of the indoor lighting, which is today's topic. So I think we should concentrate on how do we enable that. Yeah. And I know from the Lys app that I can go and connect to smart lighting, which will give me the high intensity at the time of day when I need that, and the lower when I should start declining from my midday dove activities. Could you give your thoughts to this? And your others are welcome to pitch in. But Merete, how can we embrace that changing need?
I think the point is a holistic approach. Of course, you have special situations where people are hospitalized or at bed all the time. But most people are able to move. And so one big breakthrough with research is that we can actually calculate circadian lighting for daylight. So we can use daylight, we can document. So very simple to put their favorite sofa next to a window, make an easy way out to a balcony, make it warm, shielded for wind, good view. I think view and behavior is, which is also Marilyne's point, is so important that you can influence behavior with light.
But how do the designers do that? They are not in touch with the elderly people.
Leave the standards and start thinking.
Sorry?
Leave standards and start thinking.
Okay, that's a quote. Thanks a lot. Kathrine?
Yeah, I think it's very good to bring up the challenge with elder people because they're more sensitive. And I think it's wonderful that we have an instrument to measure. How are we perceiving the light? Because it's the light that's hitting our eyes that's really affecting us. But the designers need now to understand that time is ready now because we can both calculate but also measure the amount of light that hits our eye. So we can fairly easy see how much light do we get. But the designer needs also to understand that we should create a perceived atmosphere. How do we feel in here? Because if the poor elderly people or the people at the hospital are told you should just have this cool, bright light all day, I don't think they will get better. So we need to understand, to design with 3 criteria. First, the visual qualities. Can we see? Can we read? Can we do what we need in our everyday life? Then the perceived atmosphere. How do we feel in here with our body in this space? And then the non-visual effects that is hitting our eye and has influence on our hormones. And the wonderful thing is it's possible today to both design and to validate spaces based on these criteria.
Thank you. Before I go to you, Christina, I would just like to take that quote and ask Peter about it, because forget standards and start thinking. find some little black holes.
No, I think it is a good idea.
You mentioned that it is lighting is something a bit fluffy. We cannot account for it, and you said, for instance, with energy, that's very specific. I'll challenge you on that, being an architect myself, that energy is, to my mind, something very, very fluffy, and we have just developed standards and started believing in it for a very long time. For almost 50 years, we know and respect that energy is important. Close the door, shut off the lights, and so on. But maybe are we a little bit trapped in this regimen of energy dictations on how the buildings should look, and if there are the actual, if not standards, although I think there is some coming in that respect, but if we know how to calculate it and document it, how come it doesn't have the same respect if you program a building, like you were indicating?
Well, that was a long question, Lone. But I'll see if I can remember
You can answer
everything.
shortly.
No, what my point was that if you want to do something or to develop this whole agenda, I think we need to make it very clear what the value is. And it's not that I'm not saying that light is not a valuable stuff. And it could perhaps also be very difficult, or perhaps it was very difficult to also understand the energy dilemma 100 years ago. But I mean, now every house has a meter where I can see how many kilowatt hours, and but I don't have a meter for daylight. Because I don't pay for it. Huh?
You have now?
Yeah, I realized there was a little nut. I haven't tried it yet, but I'll try. I'm looking forward to look into that. No, but still, I mean, that is just I mean, we're not seeing it. When I'm just talking about from a developer's point of view,
Right.
what is creating value, and that is, I mean, sorry to say, but that is cool cash. And of course, if you can bring down your energy bill, well, you will eventually save some money somewhere.
Good.
So right now, daylight is for free, which is of course good. But that is perhaps also why it's a little difficult. I mean, how do we actually treat this? So going back to your point, I mean, should we just ridicule all the regulations and just, I mean, look at things differently? I don't think we can, but of course it is a good attempt when you design stuff actually to extend your vision on how things should be. What I didn't say was before was that I developed this house that we are in at the moment, and this is daylight-wise not particularly easy because it is a cube more or less. It's a lot of cubes, but if you look at it from above, it's 75 by 75 meters, and that of course does not create a lot of darkness in the middle if you don't treat it. So there's a lot of roof lights and stuff like that. So, but here it's organized in how to actually use the area. So this place where we are at right now, which is, I would guess, I'm probably 15 meters away from the windows, from the facades. So that cannot really be utilized. That's a very good workspace if you're following the codes. So we're using it for something else, but can still find some very nice areas around the building. So that is not a mingling of the codes because we can't, but it would be nice because to see if that could also be challenged, that we could use these spaces for other purposes. And perhaps it's where all you experts could help us, the designers, actually to know, because we're just battling with the building reg every time. I mean, I cannot bend it. I still need a permit to build a house, otherwise it doesn't fly. So I mean, this is where we just need more knowledge. I'm sorry, I'm just repeating the conclusion from before, but so we're more than, I think everybody would like to have more flexibility in whatever they're building, and daylight can be a constraining factor, of course.
Thanks for bringing this building into the debate. It had to come at one point, so
Yes.
thanks for taking it. Could I ask you about just proportionally, or as you remember it, when the building was in planning, what was the proportional attention that was made to the indoor lighting? Bringing in the daylight is difficult in a building setup like this. So how did the planning for the indoor lighting, was that planned as double dynamics, or how was how
Maybe
was
you
that
can
done?
explain a bit about the building for people who don't know.
Please do.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're probably the right person to do this, but it's designed by Rem Koolhaus. It's an extremely expensive project, right?
Yeah, but the building, the blocks development is a Realdania funded development, and I have been associated, or actually been working with Realdania for many years. I still do. So I'm also a colleague of Anne, who was here earlier. And this is a house for now the BLOXHUB, environment where we are, which is a startup community and a development community for all kinds of industries within the sustainable city agenda. It is also, and that was what the primary purpose of the house was. It's the house for Danish Architecture Center, which is right below us. But it also contains a number of other objects or elements, housing, there's a playground, there's a big parking facility, there's a restaurant, there's a fitness center, etc. So it's a multifunctional house. And the way this was developed, yes, it is designed by Dutch architect Rem Koolhaas and his company, Office for Metropolitan Architecture. So it's a very modern development in the middle of Copenhagen. So the setting, and it's rather controversial in its architecture in many ways. It's not a debate on that, but many people have an opinion on what they think it looks like or does not look like. But anyway, it's a very, very modern house, if I could just say like that.
That's another debate.
Yeah, that's another debate. Yeah. It's very modern. It's very in the way. To getting back to your question, Lone, how was daylight actually contributing to the design process? And of course, it is because of what I told you. It's a very deep house. I mean, so we needed to accommodate for the lack of daylight, and that is primarily done by organizing areas in a clever way. So the middle of the house is an exhibition area that do not need daylight the same way as we do when we sitting at our desk and working, or when we are in our bedroom or whatever, because they actually like to black out things. So they have a totally different agenda on daylight. So there you also meet different needs when you discuss daylight in designing. So, but the whole house is not really designed alone on daylight, but designed very much on flexibility. And that is perhaps where we create an environment here where you can actually use the space for many purposes. You can basically alter all the environment rather rapidly. And many of the places have, I mean, the place we have here, where there's a big shaft, a light shaft right out here. Even though we are in the middle of the building, I mean, that is designed to let daylight come in here also, even though we are in a rather densely or dark area of the house. So, I mean, flexibility is one of the keywords I like to try to utilize the house in many ways. And there, of course, daylight is important. Yeah. Otherwise, you can't do it.
Yeah. And actually, well, you would be able to see the impact if it was not for the fact that we are in the twilight. According to my Lys app, the sun sets at 15:37, so we are past that. I don't know if we are in the nautical or the civical, but that's
twilight.
So we actually have some questions here. Going for the dawn-dusk period that you mentioned, dawn-dusk. How do we integrate that? Because it's so important for the circadian system and the visual perception of light design. And connected to that, the question is, how do we get seasonality into buildings? The different seasons of the year and the course of the day. How do we have any tools or development opportunities for that?
I think this is where technology can be really helpful. Like from our standpoint, we wanted to also develop this technology in order to personalize lighting, for example, and going back to the elderly, understanding, as you said, you did your chronotype questionnaire. Chronotype is, whether you are a tendency to be more morning person or evening person. In Denmark, we talk about A and B people, and we have 7 from academia that we translated into something that can be used in an app format. And I think the interesting thing is that we can start tailoring things like light to the individual, to the time of the year, to the people who are actually in the space. And rather than just putting the lighting on the buildings and in squares, and we can actually start putting it in for the people and tailoring it to the individual. But then again, I think the problem still is that, as both Merete and Peter said, most developers want the cheapest light possible. Mm-hmm. Maybe they want to spend a bit of money on the aesthetics of the the design, but not on the health aspects of the lighting. And typically we say we build buildings for people, but we install lighting for standards, and how can we actually solve that problem? And I think that's where we really planning this. That's what we really want to get to, right? Like, what are the steps?
Yes, excellent. Ellen,
yeah.
Kathrine.
Yeah. I think we really have a challenge here to tell the building owners and the occupants what's good lighting, and I think that's the research that should now, as Marilyne Andersen said again, this has to do with the occupants and how are they affected by the light. And we need, as researchers, to make hardcore evidence for what good lighting does to the occupants.
Yeah.
And when that is said, according to the seasons, we just had a 4 years experiment with this double dynamics of the daylight and artificial lighting with a sky scanner, because we thought, oh, if we can scan the sky and we can translate this into scenarios, then we are home safe. And we found out the seasons are so different, of course. So we need to understand how to create scenarios for the different seasons. Because in the summer we are home safe with most of the daylight situations, but in the winter we need to create completely different lighting scenarios that can boost the daylight level without spoiling the transition between day and night, because it's important for us to get an understanding, whoa, it's 3:30, the sun is setting. But again, we need to compensate with electrical lighting so that we get a little boost. And we need to understand that one of the main criteria to do lighting is to understand the natural variations as a phenomenon that we take into the design of artificial or electrical lighting. And that also counts the seasons. But that's a wonderful challenge for the Lighting Society.
That's a good path forward. Before we start talking about the future, the not tomorrow's future, but the 2025 scenario. Yes, Merete, please.
Can I add something about the elderly people that we mentioned before? Because elderly, as we get older, we need more light. It's actually logarithmical. What also happens is we're more sensible to glare. So as we get older, we physically need better lighting. And I see, maybe I sound like a very old associate professor now, but the craftsmanship of light were really great in the 50s. And when I see projects in renovation from the 50s, it's really good projects from a human perspective, like not too clear. And it's like then we focused on energy, and now everything is possible because we have LED and it can be controlled. And we have like stupid demand at how uniform the light should be. And as the only country in the whole EU, we introduced guideline as a law. So by law, we make bad lighting. But if the craftsmanship, that's really, really important. And I think the key core point of craftsmanship is to understand, to make tests. Everybody counts, like everybody, or at least those who can see, can feel like it's good for me, it's not good for me. So the craftsmanship should be the core value, and it's very hard, of course. But the good trend that is right now is that research and practice communicate much more than prior.
That's a good sign. Immediately on that, you said the craftsmanship of light, and that used to be in a better place.
Yeah.
But was that also the artificial lighting?
Yes, that was also
in a better place earlier.
Yeah, the 50s, Paul Henningsen, everything was from a human perspective. Today you have people selling projects they call human-centric light. It's a joke. I mean, unless we make light for hemp or whatever plants to grow indoor, it is human-centric. So what's not? I mean, so we just forgot that it's about people. It's about, and in the outdoor light, we're not going to talk about the outdoor light today, but everything goes together. And you can just go out and see how much you can see with a little low dimmed light level. You can see through the darkness. And then you can have security light where you shine light right at people's faces. You can't see anything despite high levels. Yeah. So the knowledge of the vision and now the circadian, which is also through it's been forgotten.
That leads very much to a question from Jens Christoffersen, who says, well, if there are no standards or regulations, how can we ensure that we get buildings of quality? And what are your thoughts about the electric solution of human-centric lighting, pros and cons? You just dismissed that in a way. Merete, while you think about that question, I would like to take it to you, Christina. How would we, or actually, Peter, you said the value. How can we ensure buildings of quality? quality, value. If it has value, you can convince about it, and you
Yes,
can
yes, if you can-
create a respect around it. So
Yeah.
what would the desired value be?
If I had the answer, I would of course give it, or had perhaps also been a very rich man, I don't know. But I think one of the things that I'm a little bit puzzled about here is that it seems like there is a long, perhaps tradition for investigating and researching in this. And we're not really, perhaps for the few, I don't know. I'm not really an expert here, but I think we are also in a world where we are engaging into a more digital society. We are seeing another way to control our indoor climate, if I may say so, and that is probably also lighting. That is not only the ventilation and whatever have you. So I think there is perhaps an unspoken, or at least an unfound potential here, where you can actually utilize knowledge that is already there, with technology that is already there also, but perhaps they haven't really found each other yet, and stimulate what you're saying, or we're lacking regulations, and bring it to another level. And I don't know what the app is doing, Lone, or what the little button there is doing, but I understand that you get some information via an app that now this time of the day you should be working out, because that is appropriate to your life scheme. And I mean, just alone that is an interesting information that you can actually grasp people's daily life in a much more tangible and understandable way than at least I'm used to. So I mean, if you can bring that together. So that was just, I mean, I'm just thinking, can we bring the knowledge, can we bring that together with the technology? And there is a huge vibe on the, well, this is also part of the PropTech environment in here, I understand that. So, of course, it's relevant to discuss it here. But the development of indoor climate is hugely, is bringing a lot of value to the ones who can utilize it properly and best.
I have heard the figure mentioned a couple of times that with the right indoor climate and stimulating people the optimal conditions, you would be able to get 15% more, a better performance from the people working in a building. You can put a price on that.
I guess you could.
And that would probably cost a lot more than the consultant who is going to program it. I don't know, Marilyne.
You fire me.
Yeah, if you okay.
But can somebody, I mean, verify that and say that aloud?
Yes, I think it is. The evidence is there.
Idea. That is a good idea.
Yes, Christina.
Yeah, I think no, I completely agree with Peter, and actually to one extent that's kind of what we're trying to do, right? Like bridge the gap between personal health and lighting, and use technology to do so, and do it in a way that's based on science and backed by data, because data is what makes it tangible. And with data, for example, we can collect information about people's energy levels, their performance. Of course, performance is a bit difficult compared to what kind of job it is. If it's in a manufacturing plant, that's more easy. If it's salespeople, it's more easy. But if it's, you know, another type of consultant or whatever, then that can be harder. But yeah, we can start to compare those data sets. But I think it goes back to the problem again about who's paying and who has the interest at heart, right? Because I think in a way it goes between health and well-being of employees and for companies, and then it's facilities managers. I don't know. Maybe this is where you guys have a lot more information and knowledge than I have, but who is actually paying for this? Is it the building owners? Are they interested in branding their buildings as healthy buildings? Because at the end of the day, like, I don't want to sit in an environment that's going to make me unhealthy every day, right? Like, I eat my blueberries, I try to go to the gym downstairs and all of that, and if I just sit in these fluorescent light tubes every day when the sun goes down, that's unhealthy for me. But who's the one who's going to take the action and actually invest in this, and who's going to feel like it's worthwhile? Because I completely understand, like, at the end of the day, it's the money that decides, right? Even though we all want to make healthy environments, with energy efficiency, we can talk about cost saving and all of that, but maybe we can talk about cost saving in terms of productivity, but if we can't talk about productivity, can we then just invest in things for health and well-being, or is that not even possible?
Aliette Poplo is actually addressing you, Peter, on that very same point. I think we are at the core of the current development tracks. Peter, do you see clients like yours starting to prioritize healthy light exposure in their buildings, even if it's more expensive? If yes, when? If no, what do you think could change their mind? So this is the
I'm sorry, but the sad answer here is no. I don't really see a tendency right now. But of course, there is movements like we're discussing it here, and of course, in more richer developments, of course, you would pay attention. But if you just take the general average development or office building, whatever is being built, that is driven by costs primarily.
Yeah.
And a lot of what is being built in this country, as I don't know about the other countries, it's not that it's very expensive buildings. If you take what public buildings, they have to accommodate to certain budgets, and of course lighting is not the first priority. I mean, the first priority when you build a house is what is going to take place in there. And if you want to accommodate for a hospital, I mean, you need to have beds and stuff and operation rooms. And if it's for an office, you need to have desk space and all the things. So that comes in first place. Eventually you come to lighting, but it's rather down the line. So how do we, if we should change this, I mean, it's just bringing it back to how can we actually bring, I mean, a better understanding of what the value. I think you're right, Christina, that you could probably it's true that people's performance or productivity gets higher if the lighting environment is better. I actually trust that, but I don't know really how much and how I should invest in it. So I think we're just lacking a lot of knowledge here. So that needs to be proven. And that is by proven facts that when it works. But of course, if it is proven, it creates also, well, it creates a revenue or a better payoff, and then it works.
But would it affect the people who makes the decision about lighting?
Yes, and more knowledge would for sure.
Yeah.
Evidence and
for
documentation.
Sure.
Good.
But I think that there is another point that is, I mean, because healthy living is, of course, it's been on the agenda for all my life, I think, but it's in various steps. I mean, then we eating something different or we dressing different. There's a lot of discussion on, I don't know, all kinds of organic lifestyle, whatever have you. But this particularly element or aspect of living healthy is perhaps not the strongest in the developer's mind at the moment.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, the visiting on the value point. We are currently looking at the solutions, the path, the tools and developments. We want to get to the future. But before we do that, I will address you, Merete, and now that you are marking,
question.
I would like to pose two questions. We have the true believers out there watching us. Thank you, guys. And they have two questions that I think you can answer.
Together with Jens, we skipped him.
Yes, remember, hold on to that.
Yeah.
Daniel Bachmann would like to know, using the MCTQ chronotype questionnaire, how can we take sleep depth of sleep into consideration? Are there alternatives? Could also be for you, Christina. And the other true believer expert question is, what are your thoughts about using the MP ratio as a design tool? And even there, I'm over-asked. So I hope you know what they mean. Merete, Madsen.
Melatonin. Yeah. Thanks.
Melanoptic?
I'll start melanoptic.
It's the melanoptic, yeah.
I'll start with Jens.
I did know.
Because I think I'm in a dilemma because it's not Jens' standard, it's an international daylight standard. But Jens, thank you for working so hard on it, and he's been a major force by that. I would like that to
It's
be...
an upcoming daylight standard.
It is there.
And it will be
but
regulations.
It haven't been implemented.
It's coming up from the EU
voluntarily.
level.
It's a guideline.
Good.
I would love it to be the law.
So Peter would have to comply with
that's
it.
That's the dilemma, because when you have a good standard, you would like it to be, and so it's what I'm complaining about is the standard for electrical lighting. That's meant to be a guideline, but have become a law here, and that's a misunderstanding.
Okay. And does that cover the sleep depth question, or is that one for you?
No, it doesn't, because there's so many things, like how does people move? Where do they look? So we need a lot of research. We need a lot of common sense. Like if we get back to the elderly home again, just to have like a really beautiful bay window where you can have gentle light, shielded, flexible solution. That's kind of the craftsmanship I'm talking about, the common sense. There's a lot of this. It's awesome that it can be calculated, because then you can have the numbers and we can say this actually works. And you don't have, sometimes you have to supplement daylight with electrical light, but daylight should be first. Mm-hmm. So how long can you go with daylight? But just to say, what should the doses be at different point of a space at different time, which depend on different people's chronotype. So it's too complex.
Okay.
But I think we can get far with common sense.
Okay, very good. And you had a point specifically to Peters on the value, or was that it?
Yeah, we tried that. Actually, I tried that to present to a client. I only said I can improve. There were 600 people in one office. Now you can guess who the client and what's the office. And we tried to say I can make your employee 12% more productive. But I can't have the same employee staying, and so people are different. So we have to put little research documents together, and in the end, it's the client's belief in you as a lighting designer. If they want to believe, I came like with a pile of research. It's been going on since the 80s, and the clients was, I don't believe you, and I was like, it's not religion, it's research. So it's an ongoing thing, and I think awareness and Christina's one is the regulation that needs to be sensible, and we're moving to the voluntary building class, the frivillig bygningsklasse, is a way just shortly where we leave this, in my opinion, really stupid little easy rule of the thumb to calculate daylight and move to real daylight calculation. And the very frustrating thing about being like architect, engineer, whatever I am, is that we have the tools. We can do it. We can optimize city. We can optimize buildings. We can do it. But we don't do it if the lowest, if the standard is lower. And if it's beneficial, you get more square meter if you take the simple law than the...
When you say lighting, you talk about indoor lighting.
I talk about
daylight
light.
And
to
artificial.
me, light is light.
So.
And we have some different light sources.
And the standards are different?
Yeah, but I think light is light. So we have a sun, we have the sky, and then we have different light sources.
Okay, good. Okay, so this is the problem that we are looking at. We have a lot of knowledge, we have the technical solutions, but we also have a lot of barriers, and there are tools out there. I'd like to leave this point, and for the final part of the debate, actually look ahead, because we are standing in a situation here today, but it's important to have your viewpoints on what is the path towards a future, say 2025. If you project yourself onto 2025, what are your visions for where we are? We are launching this event series, starting with light. We will come to air and temperature and sound, and then take the full perspective in the end. So the holistic approach is important. You have to be specific. You have to know what you're talking about. But I have to bring into the discussion this recently launched idea by Ursula von der Leyen in her State of the Union speech, where she said, if we are going to be successful on solving our climate ambition and solving the climate crisis, we have to apply a new way of thinking. And maybe that is a little bit what we are doing here, trying to mend the gaps between the silo thinking that is existing out there. And the way she says it is a way of introducing a new movement and thinking, taking inspiration from the Bauhaus, where you have arts, culture, design, architecture, and not least engineering, and putting the numbers towards it. So if we suppose that this thinking, which is already happening, of course, and it's becoming a movement by itself, where will that take us in 2025? Where will we then be as a dream scenario? I would like to ask each of you that question for your vision, and don't think of any constraints. Of course, money is an aspect. I know you will say that, Peter, but still try to really think ahead and think of the optimal solution, because I think it's interesting for people to hear from you what you think about this, and it also applies to a question I have, but let's hear your thoughts first, and there's a couple of more questions coming in. Christina,
Yeah, sure.
what would be your vision for 2025?
2025. Yeah, so I think on the note that Merete said that it's too complicated to actually tailor light to chronotypes and all of that. I think it's not too complicated. It's fairly simple. It's one single algorithm that we can improve and improve. I think it's in 2025 already we're going to have a lot more tailored solutions. It's going to all connect to our mobile app. We're going to use technology and data in an ethical way, because now, of course, a lot of people are afraid of data because the big tech giants, they've used it in a very unethical way. But data is not dangerous. It can create so much value for our health, for people, and we just need to go there. The technology is there. I think the biggest challenge of getting there is actually, the mindsets and being open and investing in this, because I think that we're not far from getting there and making things a lot more tailored and personalized and I think it's just a matter of using technology even in things that are so traditional as lighting installations and how we build spaces.
Sounds good. Sounds very positive.
Yeah.
Ellen Kathrine, your candidates and students and your own research will have advanced and made a huge difference by 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I think I'll use my age in this, because when Lone and I and Merete graduated from the School of Architecture, we were challenged by the energy targets and how to deal with energy and windows. Or we could just reduce the window size. That was kind of a solution. And we learned how to work with multiple dimensions and multiple factors. And today we actually manage this complexity when we design buildings to understand light as an energy source and a visual daylight source. And we are at exactly the same step right now. And it's extremely exciting because now we can gather the data. We can simulate in an early design process what we want to achieve with the non-visual effects stimulating our circadian rhythm, with the perceived atmosphere, with the visual qualities, with the energy consumption. And we can do this by talking about light, as Merete says, as one light source. Forget about, we design the daylight and then we design the artificial light. We talk about light. And we have an understanding of simulating this in the design process, because in 2025, we have set up criteria for what we need within each of the four, the non-visual effects to stimulate our biological rhythm, the perceived atmosphere, beautiful natural environments, talking to the environment outside, and we can see and we can manage what we want, depending on what kind of person, what are our needs, how old are we, and so on. And then, of course, the energy targets. But I look so much forward to take it to there, because I know we can do it, and we did it in the 80s and 90s. You remember? You remember how confusing it was? We were like, how am I ever going to be an architect? And I mean, we just do it now, and it'll be the same.
Great.
And of course, during research, we will do our best to set up the criteria and to create the evidence. And as a design researcher, I love that it has to do with people in real environments, because I'm so sick of lab studies, isolating one factor and coming out with some evidence we don't know how to project into everyday's life.
Great. Thank you, Ellen. Peter, your wish scenario.
A wish scenario.
Yes.
I mean, you were just mentioning the Bauhaus movement, and that is in many, many ways ever inspirational just idea that came out about 100 years ago. And if it's just from my perspective, what we're working on a lot, and which could actually be connected a little bit to that idea, and perhaps where lighting could also have a more influential role, is that what I experience is that some of the design disciplines, they're not truly integrated. And this is why also when you're designing whatever you're designing, there is going to be priorities. And I could say cost, but I could also say other things. Often it is a rather primitive way of actually designing, because you don't really know the true potential of what you're driving. So you would perhaps not really know what you can do with light, whether it's daylight or artificial lighting. I'm pretty sure there are some experts somewhere in the design process that would have, I mean, the huge piles of papers and reports, but perhaps they're not asked until a very late stage, and then it becomes too late. So they're not integrated into where the design process is actually taking place. So a vision, if I may say so.
A vision.
A vision for that could be that we are a lot better to integrate all the disciplines that actually do, I mean, have a very significant and important role in creating a better environment. And that is both the architects, or the lighting designer, or the engineer, or the artist, or whatever have you. And that can be done digitally, and that is where the division comes. So, I mean, we are not in our digital world, when we are designing, not very good at utilizing our models between the participants in the projects. The contractors, for example, are rarely involved in it. Even in the design teams, the engineers and architects are not even using the models. So it becomes a battle, and we could be a lot better to use our digital tools when we design, and by that also gaining a lot of other things that we are not perhaps gaining today. So that would be a vision.
Okay.
Yeah, the digital Bauhaus. Can I say that?
Perfect. We will submit that.
Good.
So, Merete, I'll ask you first some applause from the person who asked the question, Daniel, to your answer. So there is a response from the audience. And could I ask you to actually briefly state your vision, because then we will need to go to the closing remark.
Where can I vote directly for Ursula von der Leyen? I love that idea. New European Bauhaus, completely correct. I think my vision would be that we start to use data and all the knowledge, the young people. I mean, the students, they are so good. I mean, I'm embarrassed to think how stupid I was when I see students today. They are so skilled. But of course they don't know the craftsmanship. That takes 30 years to get with light. But the data, what they can calculate, to utilize that, to design with parametric design sustainable cities and put the possible performance for each building, because it's not the same in an inner city, which we need to densify, as it is for a tiny house in the field somewhere in the countryside. It shouldn't be treated the same way. So to utilize data, utilize the parametric design, they can, anyway, they're good, students are good. And then said, for building, what's the possible performance of this building? Then the challenge for us as architects and engineers should be the performance, not how I should do it, not like the window should be 10% of the, who cares? How I do it is my problem. I would like the performance to be set out, and I need to prove it, and I would like us to measure the building afterwards. We just, every time I hand in a building, I leave it, and I go back more. And there's, for research, there's hardly any money for post-occupancy evaluation. Everything went to develop a new LED, whatever. We pass that. So to performance tests, the buildings, live buildings, we have no idea if the buildings we design perform as we think. So we should do that. And there should be a punishment for me if it doesn't perform and people are happy. And of course, the big difficult factor in performance is behavior. Like the engineer says, we wouldn't have any indoor climate if people weren't there. But people are there. So behavior is a tricky factor.
Was that your version of short?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You want the long answer then.
Thank you very much. I think that actually answers you, each of you answer the question that we, the partner group behind the event series, would like to hear, namely your advice to an audience of choice. I think you have answered that very well. I'm looking towards Helle, who's coaching us through that. We think we have the answers to that, so we will take duly note of it and bring it forward, not only into the next debate, but also out there. And I would like to just sum up a couple of the questions and inputs that there has come on the talk, because there's also the point of residential buildings, which we haven't touched upon today because we sort of focus on the office situation. But with the lockdown, our homes are our offices, so probably we need to look into that. And I can see I can connect my Lys app to smart lighting, so that's what I'm going to investigate and try and get smarter on, and connecting some lighting units to that. There's also an input from Jacob Marquardt to the vision. He says there is now energimærkning, the energy certifications of building. Daylight is healthy. We spend 90% indoor. Why don't we make a daylight certification of buildings that would bring it to an equal level of respect and that you could program and ask for and pay for? But also certifications of offices, workplaces for their degree of healthy light exposure.
Yeah.
That's maybe an idea for you, Christina. And finally, from Dario Maccaroni, an input to the vision. He believes we should switch from energy efficient to health improving approach. Talking about lighting, looks like we should make one step back to move forward looking at daylight and biophilic design. So I think that's a beautiful remark, and I would like to, with that, close today's debate and thank you very much to the 4 panelists and also to Anne. I know you are listening, you are here with us. Marilyne, we will see hopefully again. And we hope you will join us for the next event. We are going to focus, you can find it on the website. We're going to focus on air and temperature and sound. And in the end, we're going to try and take the essence of it all. But just from today's debate, we will also do a small recap afterwards. And please keep discussing and reach out to any of us behind this. And maybe on the Bauhaus note, maybe what we need is a Bauhaus tech lab as the next thing here in BLOXHUB or otherwise. And I think the idea from Ursula von der Leyen to create this thinking and stimulate a new movement, that is what we need. And I think the combination of the disciplinaries and the silos getting out of that would release a lot of potential that is evidently there. So thank you very much for listening in and watching and contributing with your questions. And thank you to the panel. And have a nice December evening. Goodbye.